So one of the things about this is the shadow. Shadow is important. We have to make sure our shadows are good, are well done, nice and dark. Remember, in gouache, you're working from light to dark. I mean, dark to light. Sorry, because it's not like watercolor. Watercolor, you get the impact of the dark, and that's really going to give you, you know, so you start with all the lights and then you get the impact. But with this, if you notice, once I got the shadow in, you see the shadow, okay? So we have a nice shadow here. Mm-hmm. These are just see-through things, but you have this nice shadow. Then you go back, you get a flat, a nice little flat, you know, perhaps an angled brush, and then you get some of the, we should always have some of the tempera paint out, but you get some of this, and you get some of the brown, not the red, the brown.
Okay.
And we're going to go, now we're going to enter this shadow, and we're going to try to pick up individual boards. So that's why we do it that way. So we'll come in with some of the color like that. As this dries, you'll see it'll become more obvious that this is one board here, and there's another board over this way. So we'll change some of the feeling on it. We have this thing wearing out, this barn, the paint is wearing out. Well, the same thing is going to happen in the shadow. Okay? And so we do that later on. And whatever, so it makes the shadow work. So the shadow started out dark, but it winds up different. See, it winds up having a little feeling to it. And you give it a bottom. You know, you have to have the bottom. Just like we put the white up here along the edge, giving it a bottom, well, you do the same thing in the shadow. So now this is a shadow that comes off of this. Now when we carry some of the planks down into that, the darks, yeah, then it all works. Huh. Same way with this shadow. We're gonna highlight some things in there, but not too much. But we're gonna have something happening. Put something in there too. So that we have an end. Okay, so that gives us the end of the door. See, it kind of, there's a little bit of a, what would you call that? Like a, not a reflection. Sometimes it's a reflection, whatever is bouncing off of it. You know, it's next to a rock, so it puts a reflection on the board next to it.
Yeah.
Now, here's an interesting thing, and this is one of the things that you can do with gouache that you can't do with watercolor too much unless you're using white. But if you take your white, not this white, not the mixing white, but this white, okay, and there is a stick that is creating the shadow. There's a stick leaning on this door, holding it shut. So, how do we put the stick in? Boy, I got some red on it, and I got white here, and I got green on it. But remember, this is an opaque watercolor. It's kind of opaque. It's tempera.
Yeah.
So we take this, and we can start building up colors from our edge there. So we'll look at this, and we'll just start making this work.
So we lay a layer of white down first.
Yeah, we're going to put some white first because it's going to have that edge, the light edge. So we put some white first, all the way up the stick. All the way up to the end. Because it's got to be three-dimensional. It's got to stand away from that barn. And we're not worrying about the fact that we had green underneath, because that's not going to matter.
Yeah.
In a little while, most of it, if you see anything, because one of the things that does happen with gouache, you will see the colors will come from underneath. But it's okay because that gives it some character. But not that much comes through because I'm going to put some color on that after it dries. Right now it's going to be a white stick, an old white stick, but I'm going to make it a worn out, crummy white stick. So we have to justify this shadow. Right? So now we're starting to see a stick.
Yeah.
We're starting to see an object leaning against the door. You make it sloppy, it's okay, because it's an old stick. So if it gets a little sloppy, that adds to it. You don't want to make a machine stick, because that's not going to look good. All right, so there we are. Now we let that dry. See, there's our stick. Gives it dynamics. What it does is now it's pointing. It causes us to point. We're also doing it with the shadows here on this wall. There's actually a wall here pointing towards our main focus. And our main focus is this barn, especially the doors. So we're always looking for things like that, ways of doing that. The original old barn that I took this from had other things leaning here, but they took away from pointing you in the right direction. So I eliminated those. And we should always do something like that. Now we're going to go back into, while we're waiting for the stick to dry, we're going to go back into the shadows that we see here. This actually is a wall. So we have a higher elevation. Here's the ground level where the doors are. Then there's a wall here coming up off of that barn. And then there's grass up here. So actually what it was is they could drive the tractors around and the elevation of the ground went up here. So they built this little retaining wall to hold back the dirt so they could have the barn doors. So because of that, that elevation caused this shadow. This being here caused this shadow. So now we're ready. We have to put the shade or the shadow from that wall on the grass, and then we have to put the rest of the grass in. So let's do that. Remember how we did that? We got and I had a tree brush here.
Yep.
And it seems to have wandered. I got it, though. I found it.
Can't work without the tree brush.
That's it. Now, how do we get remember how we got the green? I usually mix my green. And so I use some blue, ultramarine in this case, blue, and yellow, right? And a softer yellow or a more muted yellow will give me a muted green. Now here, this is a very strong yellow. This is spectrum yellow. But if I take the, well, it's not really a yellow, but the sienna and also ochre, that will give me, not that one, not that tube. That tube is not, it's a good tube, but it's got too much liquid in it yet. It's too new, as they say.
Sure.
So there you go. Now, we're going to mix now the shadow for this. It has to be the same as this. And by the way, I'll show you in a little bit how you have to put even things, darks and lights, in the shadow. It can't just be just, you know, a movement of the same color. It has to change colors. And so we're going to do that. But first we want to mix a little of our green up so that we can get it over here in the shadow. So let's mix up some green. Now some people say, well, the paint looks sometimes chalky. Well, that's kind of the nature of the beast. You know what I mean? It does have a tendency to look chalky. But you don't have to have it look that way. Just don't add as much white.
Okay, so the chalkiness comes from the white?
Yeah.
Okay.
And so if we want to eliminate some of that, we can do that too. So we get a nice kind of an opaque color, very similar to this, but we're going to make it just a tad darker because it's coming into this tight corner. Here it's open air. Here it's like a tight corner, so probably just a tad darker. But we're still going to have some light highlights in there because, and the reason for that is, you know, things reflect. And that's one of the real things about an artist. You can tell about some artists. The difference between somebody who's just learning and somebody who knows for a while is the fact that they do put in highlights, or they do put in reflections happening and things. This is what gives a painting its life. And I always, when I'm working with the grass and shadows, I always give a kind of a wave effect. You know how you, when you do water, well, I kind of give that same look. I dab it in, drag the brush around, and then I do this look like this, because grass grows in clumps. And it seems like when I am finished with that, it will look like clumpy looking. It's been over many years that I discovered that. So it's something that you have to trust me with, but it does happen. So let's put a little tape here. I have something about edges. I don't know what it is.
You like clean edge?
Something psychological. I don't know what it is, but I have a psychological thing about edges. So, and so we'll keep on working here, getting the grass in and the shadow. And because this grass that's in this corner is growing out, so I'm going to have my grass going in towards it to kind of accent it once I start painting it. And see, in other words, I wouldn't want to do this and then try to do this. It'll all look kind of odd. So the best bet is to go like this. And eventually you start to form a nice, intimate shadow there. Which is good, because this is what, in some places you can get it all in, and then we'll do some clumping, and then later, I'll pull this off. Don't need this anymore. I'm an edge guy. I don't know what it is about edges. But anyway, so we start to get, now if you left a little bit of white in there, you could always go back and try to get that up, some of that up. In watercolor, that works terrific. That looks great when you do that. And I have lots of watercolor paintings that prove that, oh, leave those little white dots and whatever. But in this kind of paint, in the opaque, sometimes when you do that, it looks kind of odd.
Yeah, I made that mistake with my last one.
Yeah, you don't want to leave too much white. It doesn't work.
No, it didn't.
So, all right, so now we have the reason for this shadow. See, the wall is here, the shadow is cast across the barn, and it's completed here on the ground. See it?
Yeah.
And then there's something happening here that continues that shadow. That's why the shadow bends, or should be bending a little bit. Here. So it's bending a little bit because this grass here is casting a higher shadow than the wall. Now we go into the grasses above. So now we're starting to complete the whole picture. It's the last section that isn't painted, plus this little rock here. But this is the last section. So we have to get this all painted up. And again, it's grass. So we get a nice big brush. Working in bigger areas, we use bigger brushes. Smaller areas, smaller brushes. So now I'm looking, oh, here it is. It was hiding, but now I found it. My 1970s brush. Believe it or not, it was either the 60s or the 70s I bought this brush. That's how long I have it.
It's as old as me.
Yeah, imagine a brush that age. It's one thing if a human being is 40 years old. It's another thing if a brush is.
Yeah. I don't think I take that good care of my brushes.
Yeah. But this has been with me from the beginning.
Wow.
It used to be, it isn't anymore. Now it's a utility brush. It used to be my sky brush. I only did skies with it. And now it is my utility brush. I do grass and whatever I can with it. So we're going to do now the grass up on this kind of this platform here. Now go in the shapes that you're going to do this grass. In other words, kill this edge has to be killed right there. But the way that grass is going to flow, that's the way you want to do it. And the actual way that this is, it's grass that's been tamped down and just let get too long. And so it has a falling down look to it. It's as opposed to the shadows, it's clumping up because that particular grass is, apparently cut a little bit so they can get into the barn. Here it isn't. So it does other things. So you want to paint in that direction, in those directions. So that, because with the opaque paint, like we're using here, that opaque paint is going to have things happening. Some parts are going to be blanked, less paint. Some will be more as you're painting it. So it's the nature of it. And so you want to make sure it's going in the right direction. You should do that when you do watercolor too. That has the same effect. And we'll put in a little shape to the grass. Let's give it some shape. In other words, we'll put in some grass. But keep in mind that details later can be made. You can always make details.
Mm-hmm.
You can always add the details. This is not the detail part yet. This is just this is like building the basics. And then later you get the details. You come in with the details. And you don't have to do every individual strand of grass that you may see in a scene. Say you're painting plein air and you're looking at a bunch of grass. Well, you don't have to, well, this one is bent this way and that one is bent that way and this one is this way. If you do that, or if you're using a photograph or something, all you have to do is get the feeling of the grass, the way it goes. You don't have to get it exactly every blade. That is actually existing at that moment from your angle. Because if you take one step, the grass changes.
Yeah.
And if you take another step, it changes again. So just get the feeling of the grass from where you're looking. That's all you need. And that says it. So we have this now. And now we're going to start with this wall. Now, if you notice, the wall is going to have, now I'm going to change dishes. Because now that's the grass and the shadow dish. Now I'm going, and I can go back to those later. That's the one thing about gouache you can do. You can go back and wet that even though it dries and use that paint again. Whereas if you're working with acrylic dries and that's it. You have to put out more paint. Once it dries, it's finished. Okay, so now let's go into some of this wall. Now it's an old wall, an old stone wall. Should it look real pretty and, you know, very machined looking, like the guy just put the thing down? No. The what do you call is all missing, the concrete's missing, and there's a lot of junk on it, and people have walked past it so many times and banged into it, whatever, and a tractor hit it, and whatever happened to it. So it's an old wall, and it's outside. So it probably had mold growing on it at one point, and it turned black. Keep that in mind when you're painting the wall. Again, larger area, a larger brush. Smaller area, smaller brush. So, now, let's get this in. Now, with, again, you add some color, but basically what you're after are grays. You're after grays here with the wall. So you have a little bit of white. And we're putting in grays. Now see that? All right, so if it gets a little chalky, boy, that's great. So you pre-mix that. See, I have a color pre-mixed there. Then I go and I change. Sometimes it's good. When I was doing illustration, on doing all my illustration, I used to use an eye dryer. I used to mix all these colors in a ice cube tray. You can mix it, so you have a lot of it. And then all you do is just get some paint, some water, and put it back on the paint. And that's what we used to do. That's what I used to do. And I don't do that anymore. I just clean the dish and go for another one. But because I was doing so many places of grass and so many stone walls and stuff like that, then I could save it for the next wall. Okay, so let's get in that wall. I'm not going to put any chalk on that one. All right, so we'll start in and we'll start putting in the wall. Now, the wall comes this way, and then it's broken down here. Okay. It's kind of going around. So this is in light, this is in shade. So let's go, and we'll start right here on this edge. We're going to go right on this edge. Come around here, down here, and then the grass is going to be down there. So we're going to kind of make it look like this. Now the feeling of this is more architecture. I'm using a filbert brush, and I'm trying to make it look a little bit architectural. Like at one time, somebody actually sat down and said, let's do this right. And that's the way they did it. And then I get some brown. Let's get some brown and some of this, because now we're making a transition. See, we're going over towards where there's some reflection. Something happened, I don't know, somebody did something, and there's it's changing direction. And we give little stuff to there. And then we go to the light stuff. And that we're going to take right into the corner. So we'll be a little more careful. We'll come around the edge. I'll fix it up with the detail brush. But I'll kind of make it look like this. Like water's been running across it for a century. Okay. And we'll give it a kind of a look like this. Its perspective is this way. Mm-hmm. So all the lines should go in that direction. Movements, things that you're moving, always will go back in that direction. The first ones are this because it's blocks. Then the second ones, it's because it's lined up like soldiers. Then that's how you have to do that. Now we'll go along the edge with a nice gray. And we try to get as close as we can to what we have there. And again, remember, it's an old wall. This again is detail. When you're doing detail, you have to use a different brush. Leave some of the white show. Looks all right on this one. See, sometimes you can do it, sometimes you can't. It doesn't work. Make it look a little blocky. And it changes almost every time you do a new picture. So this one may not look like that one.
Yeah.
Okay, so that looks good so far. So there's your, basically your wall with some reflection thrown on it from this. You know, you want to add a little red. Some people get very technical and say, well, you should put a little red in there because it's reflected. But I think it's good enough like that. Okay, now